So in today's video, I'm going to show you a loose and easy way to paint people. After that, we'll paint a bunch of them and create a sort of crowded city art print. As usual, you can follow this with any brushes you want, but I'll list mine in the description. So the process for painting these people is really simple. It's just a 6-step process, and I'm going to do each one from a reference photo. And the first thing I need to do is draw an outline. So for that, I'm going to use the colored pencil brush. And I'll just use a sort of indigo color like this. And you can draw this however you want. It's very loose and kind of free form. But usually what I do is I'll draw the head first like this. Then I'll draw the torso. And then I'll draw the arms. And usually at the ends of the arms, I'll just do 4 fingers like that, just to keep it simple. And then in cases where lines are overlapping, I'll just erase them. And that's pretty much the hard part. Next, I'll just finish up this outline by just adding all the remaining details. Now, since this whole illustration doesn't really have feet or legs in it, I'm just going to draw them just around to waist level. And believe it or not, even though this is pretty rough, this is totally good enough. Next, I can move on and start adding some color, and that'll be on a blank layer above our outline. And I will set this new layer to multiply. For the brush, I'm going to do everything using the smooth dry around. And I'm just going to look at my reference photo and try to imagine kind of an average color that represents everything. And I think in this case, I'm going to choose a bluish green tone, or maybe a kind of an olive tone. And maybe at kind of a small size, maybe around 8%, I'm going to use this to paint all the clothing areas, but I'm going to avoid any areas like the skin or the face. And once I've gone over the clothes, I'll shrink my brush size quite a bit smaller, and I'm just going to go over the edges of the kind of exposed skin areas like this, just sort of outlining it. Next, I need to erase the sort of outer edges of the outlines. So for that, I'm going to select the outline layer again. Then I'll grab the eraser brush, set to the fine liner pen, and this is kind of hard to explain, but I'm just going to erase all the outer outlines except the ones that are like details. So for example, the fingers, I'll leave those because they're details, but all of this stuff on the outside, I'll just erase it. And the reason for this is I want to increase the sort of abstract uncertainty in this illustration. After that, I can do a little bit of color shifting, and this is an optional step. And to do this, I'm going to make sure the colored layer is selected. Then I'll grab my selection tool, set to freehand. And there's kind of 2 stages to this. The first thing I like to do is just create a sort of random color variation. So I'll just make a random selection like that. I'll feather it out around 10%. And then I'll just shift the hue and mess with the saturation. Just a little bit, because with digital watercolor, sometimes it ends up being too consistent. And so this adds in a little bit more interest. There we go. The next part of this is, if you want, you can sort of selectively adjust certain features. So for example, the backpack, I'll just select that and I'll shift the hue of it just a little bit. I still want it to stay green, but I'll adjust it just enough so it stands off a bit. And I can do this in a few other areas as well. So at this point, the illustration has all the colors and details kind of added in, but it's still very rough, and I think it doesn't look quite right. So the 5th step in this process is going to be to refine everything. So for that, we need to merge the colors and the lines onto one layer. So I'll just pinch them together like that. Then I'll go to liquefy. I'll set it to push. And I'm going to use this to sort of bend and manipulate this and make it look a little bit nicer and more like the reference. And most of this process is going to be spent on the face because I think it's kind of a key part of this. It doesn't have to match the reference photo exactly, but I want it to have an interesting expression. And there we go, I think that looks a lot better. The next part of this refinement process is to add a skew. So for that, I'll grab the arrow tool, set it to distort, and you can do this however you want, but usually I'll just kind of lean it in the direction that they're facing, and then I'll use this blue node to shift it back. And lastly, once the character's finished, all we have to do is remove the transparency. And I can show you kind of what's going on here. So if I draw on a layer below her, it's going to show through. And that's going to be a problem later on because I'm going to create a bunch of people and make an overlapping arrangement. So what we need to do is find a way to remove that transparency. So to do that, I'll make a blank layer below her. I'll choose any random bright color. Then I'll use the fine liner pen. And I'll just go around and create a sort of silhouette. Then I'll reconnect it and just drag the color to fill in the whole thing. Now, of course, it's red, but we can fix it by just going to the hue, saturation, and brightness and just raising the brightness to max. Now in the layers panel, you can see we've got this white silhouette, and now anything that we paint below her, it's going to be totally covered up and nothing will show through. So to finish her up, I'll just merge her together with that white silhouette, and I can move on to the next characters. And for this illustration, I'm going to need maybe 6 or 7 different people, but just to keep the video short, I'll just fast forward through this and paint 2 more. I won't narrate this part because I think it's pretty straightforward, but I will show the progress on the left side. And there we go. In total, I managed to paint 9 different people, and they're just all kind of randomly scattered around, but on separate layers. And at this point, I'm just going to go through and use the arrow tool to create a sort of overlapping arrangement. Obviously, the characters that are in the back need to be on lower layers, and the ones in the front need to be on higher layers. This process can be a little bit tedious, but I think it's worth spending the time. And there we go. I think this arrangement looks pretty good. It's optional, but you can finish this up by adding some really simple kind of anonymous people in the background just to fill in these empty spaces. And I'm just doing these with the Shoto brush on a top layer. And just like that, this crowded art print is finished. I think in retrospect, this scene might look better if I add even more people. I think you could even reuse some of these if you just sort of adjusted the colors and maybe warped them a little bit. And I think I'll give this a try in the future. As always, please give this video a like if you think I've earned it. And here are 2 more similar illustration tutorials I think you'll love to watch next.